I always believed monsters hid in abandoned places, waiting in the shadows for unlucky strangers to wander too close. I never imagined the worst monsters would be the people who shared my last name. The night my family handed me over to a forgotten estate deep inside the forest, they smiled as if they were giving me a wonderful gift. They expected the darkness inside that place to erase me forever. Instead, something inside those walls had been waiting for me long before I was born. My name is Elena, and until a few months ago, I thought my life was painfully ordinary. I worked long shifts at a small bookstore, rented a tiny apartment that always smelled like old coffee, and tried to ignore the endless phone calls from my relatives asking for money they never intended to repay. Ever since my parents died in a car accident when I was 16, I had been raised by my Uncle Victor and his family. They constantly reminded me how expensive it had been to feed and house me, even though I spent every spare hour working to support myself. No matter how much I sacrificed, they treated me like an unwanted burden that had overstayed its welcome. Everything changed after my grandmother passed away. During the funeral, my uncle barely pretended to mourn. Instead, he whispered constantly with lawyers, checking papers and making mysterious phone calls while avoiding eye contact with everyone else. After the ceremony ended, he suddenly became unusually kind toward me. He invited me to dinner, laughed at my jokes, and even apologized for years of cold behavior. His sudden kindness felt unnatural, like sunlight appearing during a thunderstorm. I wanted to believe people could change, but something deep inside me kept warning that every smile hid another reason. A week later, Uncle Victor announced that our family had inherited an old countryside estate from a distant relative none of us had ever met. According to him, the property was incredibly valuable, but there was one strange condition written into the inheritance papers. Someone carrying my bloodline had to spend 3 nights inside the mansion before ownership could legally transfer to the family. He acted as though it was a harmless tradition left behind by eccentric ancestors. Everyone around the dinner table nodded with fake confidence, insisting it would be an easy task. The way they all looked at me made my stomach tighten before anyone even spoke my name. They explained that because I was the youngest direct descendant, the responsibility belonged to me. They promised the mansion was perfectly safe and claimed all the stories about ghosts and disappearances were nothing more than local legends invented to scare curious children away. My aunt even reached across the table to squeeze my hand, something she had not done in years. Her smile looked warm, but her fingers felt cold enough to send a chill through my entire body. I noticed my cousins avoiding my eyes, silently staring at their plates as though they already knew something I did not. The drive to the estate took almost 4 hours. The farther we traveled, the fewer houses appeared along the road. Cell phone service disappeared completely, replaced by endless forests that seemed to swallow every trace of civilization. Thick gray clouds rolled across the sky, covering the afternoon sun until the world looked trapped beneath permanent twilight. When we finally reached the iron entrance gate, I noticed strange symbols carved into the rusted metal. They looked ancient, almost scratched there by desperate hands instead of skilled craftsmen. Even before stepping out of the car, I felt like someone unseen was quietly watching me from the trees. The mansion stood alone on top of a small hill surrounded by dead gardens and twisted trees that bent toward the building as though trying to escape it. Most windows were broken, while dark stains covered sections of the cracked stone walls. The front door hung slightly open despite the complete absence of wind. Every instinct screamed for me to turn around and leave immediately. Instead, my uncle placed an old brass key into my hand and reminded me that I only had to survive 3 nights before our family could finally claim its fortune. The word survive escaped his mouth so naturally that I wondered if he realized what he had just admitted. Before leaving, my aunt hugged me tighter than she ever had before. As she stepped away, I noticed tears gathering in her eyes. For one brief second, guilt replaced the fake smile on her face. Then my uncle called her back toward the car, and that guilt disappeared just as quickly. Without another word, they climbed inside their vehicles and drove away. I stood alone as the sound of their engines faded into the distance. Silence settled over the estate with such crushing weight that even my own breathing sounded unnaturally loud. Inside, the mansion smelled of damp wood, dust, and something far older that reminded me of forgotten graves. The furniture remained untouched beneath thick white sheets, as though the owners had vanished in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. A massive grandfather clock stood in the entrance hall. Although its hands were frozen at exactly 3:13, it suddenly chimed once the front door closed behind me. The sound echoed through every hallway before disappearing into the upper floors. I slowly turned toward the staircase and realized fresh muddy footprints stretched across the wooden steps. They looked as though someone had walked upstairs only moments earlier. I convinced myself another caretaker must have entered before me. Holding a flashlight with trembling hands, I followed the footprints to the second floor. Every step produced long creaks that echoed through the silent house. Halfway down the hallway, the muddy prints stopped directly outside a locked bedroom door. There were no footprints leading away from it, no open windows, no hidden passage, just a closed wooden door with deep scratches covering the lower half, as if something trapped inside had spent years trying to claw its way out. As I leaned closer, a slow knocking came from the other side. 3 gentle taps echoed through the wood, followed by complete silence. I froze, barely breathing as another 3 knocks answered the first. Then a soft voice, almost too quiet to hear, whispered my name with heartbreaking sadness. It did not sound threatening, it sounded relieved. The horrifying truth was that I had never told anyone I was coming. Every instinct told me to run, yet my feet refused to move. The voice behind the door spoke my name again, softer this time, almost like someone greeting a loved one after years apart. My hand drifted toward the rusted handle before I stopped myself. Whoever or whatever waited inside should not have known who I was. The air around me turned icy, and the flashlight flickered violently. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed from the first floor. It sounded as though the front door had slammed open with tremendous force. I hurried downstairs, convinced my family had returned after realizing how cruel their decision had been. Instead, the entrance hall was completely empty. The front door remained closed exactly as I had left it, but muddy water covered the wooden floor in long winding trails. They were different from the footprints upstairs. These prints were far too large to belong to any normal person, and they led toward the dining room before disappearing into thin air. The silence that followed felt alive, pressing against my ears until I could hear my own heartbeat pounding like distant drums. Searching for another light source, I entered a study lined with towering bookshelves. Most of the books had rotted away, but one leather journal rested alone on the desk as if it had been placed there recently. The first pages described the family that had built the estate nearly a century earlier. As I continued reading, the handwriting became rushed and desperate. The final entry spoke of a powerful curse that demanded one blood relative every generation. According to the journal, greedy descendants kept sacrificing innocent members of their own family in exchange for wealth, believing the spirit haunting the mansion would spare everyone else. My stomach twisted as the truth settled in. The inheritance had never been a reward. It had been bait. My uncle had not brought me there because I was the youngest descendant. He had brought me because I was expendable. Every act of kindness, every reassuring smile, and every comforting promise had been carefully planned to lead me into the mansion willingly. They had expected the curse to end with my death while they collected the estate and everything hidden beneath it. A sudden whisper drifted across the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of children laughing somewhere above me. The laughter lasted only a few seconds before changing into desperate screams. Every candle in the study burst into life at the same moment, even though I had never lit them. Their pale flames revealed dozens of portraits hanging on the walls. I had walked past them earlier without noticing anything unusual. Now every painted face had turned toward me. Their eyes followed my every movement, filled not with anger but with sorrow. One portrait caught my attention immediately. It showed a young woman wearing an old-fashioned white dress. Her face looked almost identical to mine, except for a thin scar running across her forehead. Written beneath the painting was a single sentence: "The first daughter was betrayed by her own blood." Before I could understand what it meant, the candle flame stretched unnaturally high. The woman inside the portrait slowly lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward the ceiling. A deafening scream exploded from the locked bedroom upstairs. This time it was not pleading, it was furious. The entire mansion shook violently as dust poured from the ceiling and doors throughout the house slammed shut one after another. The brass key my uncle had given me suddenly became burning hot inside my pocket. When I pulled it out, strange symbols glowed across its surface. Somehow I knew that the key did not unlock the front door. It unlocked the room where my family believed the monster was trapped. With trembling hands and a racing heart, I climbed the staircase once more. The scratching behind the locked door had stopped completely. The silence waiting on the other side felt even more terrifying than the noise had been. I raised the glowing key toward the ancient lock, took one slow breath, and turned it. The heavy door creaked open. What stood inside was not the monster my family had feared. It was the truth they had spent generations trying to bury.